the fact that Ottawa would retaliate against the United States is something that seems to irk him. Even though he obviously started this trade war with Canada, it seems to be a problem that Canada is willing to push back.
Trump doubles auto tariff. Within hours, the market answered. General Motors down, Ford down 3%, Stellantis down more. A tariff aimed at Canada, and the first damage report came from Detroit. The question is why? And the answer is hiding inside the way your car is actually built.
Now, President Trump is threatening to dramatically escalate his trade war with Canada. Trump posted on Truth Social Sunday that he'll raise tariffs on all Canadian-made cars, trucks, auto parts, and steel to 50%, starting January 1st of next year. That's according to Reuters. Right now, auto tariffs only apply to content that does not comply with USMCA in vehicles built in Canada and shipped to the U.S.
Here is what was actually announced, not at a podium, in a post, over the weekend, on Truth Social, and by Monday morning it was official policy. Listen to how the auto industry's own trade press reported it. Here is the reason Trump gave, in his own words on screen, unedited. He says Canada's tariff policies are hurting American farmers. That is the case for this tariff. Hold on to it, because the numbers that follow belong to the same American economy he says he is protecting. Now the part nobody in Washington explained on Monday. Since the 1990s, the auto industry has treated North America as one factory floor. A part can be forged in Ontario, machined in Michigan, sent back across the border for assembly. The same piece of metal can cross the US-Canada border multiple times before it ever becomes your car. That is not a loophole. That is the design. It is what made North American cars competitive. So a 50% tariff at that border is not one tax. It is a tax collected again and again on the same vehicle.
Discussions. Medium and heavy duty pickups were sort of being separated from the rest of the light duty vehicles. And all those are, hit with 25% tariffs and have been for a while now, coming into the US from Canada. The US wanted to see light duty vehicles get a lower tariff rate. The consensus is it was 15%. But they wanted a carve out for, medium and heavy duty pickups that, wouldn't get that exemption. So the tariff would remain at 25%. And Canada just said no. We need those trucks included. We know we build some of those pickups up here in Canada, and it affects larger vehicles, commercial vehicles as well. But we've got a brand new Super Duty assembly plant in Oakville. Ford just put about $5 billion Canadian into that plant, and they're going to start production kind of any day. GM builds the Silverado heavy duty in Oshawa. That's been one of the things that, simply wasn't going to advance with these talks. And, it's only one part of what broke things down. But it did seem like a fairly substantial one that both sides weren't willing to give.
And here is what nobody noticed on Monday. Remember the question, why Detroit? One analysis puts the cost at up to $4,239 more for imported parts, up to $8,722 more per imported vehicle. General Motors has already lived this. In 2025, at the old 25% rate, GM reported $3.1 billion in tariff costs. That rate is now doubling. About 17% of Chevrolet Silverado production happens in Canada. The Chrysler Pacifica is built only in Canada. There is no American Pacifica plant to protect. There is only a more expensive Pacifica.
Goods. What do we know? This is pretty fresh news right now, but what do we know so far about it?
Yeah, it's essentially the threat here is a 50% tariff on basically anything auto related coming in from Canada, which would be an enormous difference from what we have today. As much as we have those 25% vehicle tariffs, there's parts exemptions and parts moving across the border are exempt entirely. So, that 25% tariff on Canadian made vehicles actually is about half that with parts exemptions. Canadian parts going to US auto plants to go into vehicles that are built in the US are exempt entirely from those tariffs. So going to 50% on all those products would be an enormous change and obviously a huge escalation just over the weekend. But, that was the fear here that this would happen or something like this would happen, that you get into this spiral of escalation that sort of leads off. And that's what we're seeing, at least, first thing Monday morning from the president, is that, we're going to have more and more of this, and things are going to get uglier before they get.
So why did the talks really break on autos? The industry's own trade press laid it out in detail. Listen.
But he's saying it pretty clearly now that they're intent on destroying an industry that's hugely significant to Ontario and to the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth remembering that right from the outset, the stated goal of this tariff regime when it comes to Canada from the United States has been to harm Canada. And to economically weaken us. And auto has been target number one of the U.S. administration since Trump came back into office. And so in that sense, I think that Greer's comments are very much in line with what we've heard and understood from the administration's actions to date. But I think that the broader story here in this back and forth about what has occurred is that you can't also.
And in Ottawa, nobody is treating this as an accident. And to be fair, there is a real argument here. Tariffs can pull some production south. Some reshoring announcements since 2025 are real. If a plant moves to Michigan, those are real American jobs. That is the strongest version of the case, and it deserves to be heard in full.
Jenny, do you think that the California governor is on to something there? I mean, there has been a lot of news coverage about this tariff fight in the United States. A lot of, swing state folks who are running in the midterms concerned, particularly in places like Michigan and Maine.
I do. I'm a big believer in the power of free trade. And I think ultimately in time, and we're already seeing it, the president's ill-fated attempt to control his own economy, control our economy by increasing tariffs, increasing barriers, their trade policy, as the trade rep calls it, is flawed and bad public policy. And you're already seeing the outcomes, and the sort of downstream politics of that is having its effect. It's just happening slowly and not as much as we'd like, and they're big.
And inside the United States, the political math is starting to bite in the exact states that build cars. But here is what the same 3 days actually showed. The companies this tariff is supposed to protect, their stocks fell on the news. The company with the most American production, GM, is the one already paying billions in tariff costs. And the automakers, according to Bloomberg's reporting, believed a trade deal was close. They planned for a deal. They got a doubling. You can argue tariffs bring jobs back over 10 years. The market judged what they do this year in one morning.
Of Automotive News Canada. The industry did get one deal done north of the border this weekend. Unifor and General Motors have reached tentative deals covering more than 4,600 workers at
In Canada? Canada did not tear anything up. The same weekend, Washington posted its threat. Canada's auto union and General Motors reached a tentative deal covering more than 4,600 workers at 4 Ontario plants. And the counter list, 700 products, dollar for dollar, came the next day, with a 2-week fuse and a $7.5 billion shield for workers. We covered that list in full in our last video. One side doubled a tariff on its own supply chain. The other side signed a labor deal and published a plan. That contrast is the story of this trade war so far. So here is where things stand. 50% on Canadian cars, trucks, and parts from January 1st. Detroit's 3 giants down the same morning, up to $8,700 more per vehicle by one estimate. A supply chain built as one factory floor, now taxed at the border, again and again. And a Canadian counter list that starts biting September. Let me be straight with you about what I think this announcement really is. It is not an auto policy. It is a pressure tactic, and I think it is aimed at the wrong pressure point. You do not squeeze Canada by taxing a supply chain that has Michigan on one end of it. The market said the same thing within hours, in the only language Washington reliably hears. 3 red tickers. Will Canadian auto towns feel this? Yes. Honestly, Windsor has more to lose per capita than Detroit, and nobody should pretend otherwise. But here is the difference I keep coming back to. Canada answered with a list, a date, and a support package. The United States answered its own failed negotiation by taxing its own factory floor. One of those is a plan. The other is a mood. A lot of Canadians are tired of being told this is what winning looks like, and I think a lot of American auto workers are about to join them. In the coming weeks, watch 2 things. Whether this 50% number survives contact with Detroit's lobbyists before January, and whether the September 8th counter tariffs bring anyone back to the table. My guess, and it is a guess, is that this tariff gets quietly softened before it ever collects a dollar. So, 50% on Canadian cars, pressure on Canada, or a tax on Detroit. Tell me below.